The vastness of space felt increasingly oppressive as the Tempest approached the edge of the black hole, a cosmic entity of unimaginable size and power. Commander Lyra Hale sat in her chair, watching the screen before her, where the ship's data updated at a frantic speed. The black hole, called the Abyss, was the largest and most mysterious ever recorded by humanity, and there was Lyra, leading the mission that could unravel the secrets of the universe. Beside her, her two main officers, Dr. Oliver Byrne, the chief astrophysicist, and Kara Ortiz, the operations commander, observed in silence, all aware of the monumental risk they were taking. Lyra, however, seemed unfazed. She had faced challenges before, but this time felt different. It wasn't just the black hole's sheer size. It was something in the air, something invisible, suggesting that this mission was more than just another scientific expedition. Something was waiting, something far greater than any of their calculations could predict. "Commander, we're almost at the singularity point," Kara said, the tension in her voice reflecting the gravity of the situation. "The gravitational distortion is beginning to affect the sensors. We need to prepare the ship for possible system failures." Lyra nodded in acknowledgement, responding calmly, but her eyes remained fixed on the lines and numbers dancing across the screen. She felt the weight of the moment, knowing that whatever happened here would change everything, yet she couldn't show hesitation. The Tempest was equipped with the most advanced technology on Earth, but no one knew for certain what would happen once they crossed the event horizon. She glanced briefly at Oliver, who was frowning, absorbed in his own calculations. She knew he was as worried as she was. For weeks, the mysterious signals emanating from the Abyss had intensified, forming patterns that defied any logical explanation. The team still had no explanation for the energy pulses, which seemed to increasingly interfere with the communication systems. They were about to face the unknown in a way never before experienced. "Are we ready, Commander?" Oliver finally asked, breaking the tense silence hanging over the control cabin. Lyra looked at him for a moment, her expression impassive. She knew that he, like everyone else on the crew, feared what they were about to face, but there was no room for hesitation. "We're ready," she replied, her voice firm. Around her, the ship trembled slightly as the gravitational forces increased, pulling them toward the Abyss. The navigation system adjusted automatically, but the sensation of temporal distortion was palpable. Time seemed to stretch and bend, and Lyra felt an indescribable unease. Something was wrong, but she didn't know what. "The distortion is getting stronger," Kara said, and Lyra knew it wasn't just the system. There was something more, something invisible, yet palpable. "Increase the measurement intensity. Let's push it to the limit," Lyra ordered, her voice echoing through the ship's communication system. Whatever was lurking on the other side, she had to know what it was, no matter the cost. The ship drew closer, and then, with a low metallic sound, the control panels began to fail. The lights around them flickered, gravity tugging them toward a barely perceptible axis that made the floor seem to slip underfoot. "Commander, we're having trouble with the main systems," Kara shouted, moving quickly to adjust the controls. Lyra didn't respond at first, absorbing the strange sense of disorientation. The screen before her blurred and the numbers danced in a nonsensical way. The black hole wasn't just affecting the systems, it was influencing reality itself, distorting space-time as they neared its edge. Lyra felt a growing pain in her head, as though something was trying to penetrate her mind, and her breathing became labored. In a flash of insight, she realized something terrifying. The black hole wasn't just a dense and destructive mass of matter. It was an intelligent force, something aware of the ship's presence, something connecting with them in ways scientists had never predicted. The mission had taken an unexpected turn. They were no longer merely observing an anomaly, they were becoming part of it. "Dr. Byrne, what's going on?" Lyra asked, her tone now more urgent. Oliver stood motionless, staring intently at the data on his screen. He seemed to be in a trance, and when he finally spoke, his words were barely above a whisper. "There's no explanation for this, Commander. The data is distorted, as though the black hole is altering the very flow of time. But it doesn't make sense. It's beginning to interfere with our perceptions." Before he could continue, the ship lurched again, and an indescribable wave of energy rippled through the cabin. Lyra had to hold on to the panel to keep from being thrown off. She looked out the ship's window and saw the distortion of space ahead. The black hole's edge seemed to unfold, and something immense and unfathomable moved within, reflected in waves of light that curved like shattered mirrors. This was more than the end of a scientific journey. It was the beginning of an encounter with something beyond all human understanding. The Tempest was dragged by an invisible force, and Lyra could only watch as the ship approached the brink of the abyss. She knew something was connecting with them, something the crew was unprepared to comprehend. The black hole's consciousness, or whatever lay beyond, seemed to be growing more aware and interactive. Something or someone was waiting to communicate, and somehow the ship had become the key to that communication. Lyra looked at her crew's faces, their eyes filled with fear and uncertainty, yet something within her insisted there was no turning back. There was no choice. They were in uncharted territory, and now the mission was about more than exploring a phenomenon. It was about confronting the infinite, grappling with questions humanity had never thought to ask. The black hole wasn't a barrier, it was an invitation. What would you do if you were about to enter a black hole, knowing it could alter reality itself? Share your theory in the comments and share this mystery with those who also need to find out what's lurking in the depths of the universe. The Tempest now hovered on the brink of the abyss, and the sense of closeness to the unknown was palpable. The black hole, once a mere cosmic distortion, was beginning to reveal itself as a living entity, something beyond human comprehension. Lyra Hale, her gaze fixed on the control screen, felt her heart pounding faster, as though the abyss's gravity was tugging at her emotions too. She knew their mission of exploration had turned into a journey to comprehend the incomprehensible, and time seemed to stretch and contract around them. "Commander," said Kara, the operations commander, her voice tense. "The sensors are detecting something, a pattern, but we can't decipher what it is." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. The pattern. She felt it in her bones, a call emanating from within the black hole itself, something that was manipulating gravitational waves as though using them to communicate. "Increase the intensity of the analysis," Lyra ordered, her tone firm, though her eyes wavered. Something was there, something intelligent, something that shouldn't exist. The communication systems were failing at an alarming rate. The frequencies were distorting, and the radio emitted only constant static. Lyra stared at the screen, where flickering images of light and darkness alternated. The ship was slowly being pulled into the black hole. But what disturbed her most wasn't the gravity or the physical distortion. It was the growing sense that she was losing control of the ship. Something within that vortex was taking over its systems, and worse yet, it seemed that her own mind was also being affected. Lyra tried to ignore the odd feeling of mounting pressure in her chest, but deep down she knew something was connecting with her, something that should never have been awakened. "Commander, the distortion is affecting our calculations," said Oliver, the chief astrophysicist, his voice weaker than usual. "None of the data makes sense. The laws of physics, they're unraveling." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, feeling as if everything around her was collapsing, and the only sound left was the ship's pulse, like a pounding heartbeat. They were nearing the heart of the unknown, and she wasn't sure she could withstand the impact. The crew was growing increasingly restless. Temporal distortions intensified, and some team members began reporting missing chunks of time, as though the ship were moving through multiple layers of reality. "Commander, the external images, they're changing," Kara said, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Lyra moved to the observation window, her eyes fixed on what had seemed like an endless abyss just moments before. Now, there was something more, something that shouldn't exist, something beginning to surface from the depths. The black hole, previously a dark, distant point, now seemed to have a shape, a contour that pulsed with an indescribable glow, as though it were breathing. Yet it wasn't just the black hole that had changed, the ship had changed too. Lyra felt the gravity of the moment. Literally, the ship was being reconfigured by forces she couldn't control, and her own thoughts were beginning to warp, as if the laws of reality were deteriorating. "We're losing control," Oliver said, his voice shaking. "But this can't be happening." Lyra closed her eyes briefly, trying to gather her thoughts as best she could in the midst of chaos. She thought about her daughter, about what had brought her here, and about how this moment felt somehow destined to occur. She'd never believed in destiny, but everything in her mind now seemed to be lining up in a terrifying way. She was no longer merely commanding a scientific mission. She was being pulled into the very mystery that had shaped her life, as though it all had a deeper purpose, a calling she couldn't ignore. "Communications have been restored," Kara said, her voice urgent. "Commander, you need to see this." Lyra stepped over to the screen, and when she saw what was on it, she felt the air leave her lungs. On the screen was a distorted image of the ship's reflection, but it wasn't the ship in real time. It was a future version, no longer intact, but broken, warped. Something was trying to communicate with them, and Lyra realized that perhaps the ship wasn't simply being pulled into the abyss. Maybe it was being brought back from the future. "Commander, something is altering the ship's temporal structure," Oliver said, his gaze distant, as though he was seeing something beyond reason. "The black hole, it's not just a gravitational phenomenon. It's manipulating space and time in ways we can't understand." Lyra drew in a steadying breath, summoning her strength. What she was about to say had no scientific basis, but deep down she knew that what was happening defied every equation. "This isn't just science," she whispered, more to herself than the others. "This is something beyond our understanding. A black hole isn't just a glitch in physics, it's a living entity."
Oliver looked at her, his face pale, but before he could respond, the ship was rocked by a massive jolt, and the lights began to flicker frantically. Lyra knew the vessel was losing a fight against space-time itself, but she had no idea that as she neared the black hole, she was herself becoming part of the phenomenon. "Commander, we're being hit by an unknown wave of energy," Kara said, panic in her voice. "The black hole isn't just pulling us in, it's connecting with us, with our minds." Lyra felt her body grow heavy as though under the influence of a suggestion, an invasion. Her thoughts became jumbled, and she heard her daughter's voice, her daughter, who had died years ago, echoing in her mind as though calling to her. But when she tried to answer, the voice was no longer hers. It was distorted, fragmented, as though someone or something were using her memories and thoughts to create an illusion. The ship was being transformed by something unimaginable within the black hole, something feeding on human emotions, causing the crew to lose themselves in a psychological abyss. "We're in danger," Lyra said, her voice firm, but her eyes revealing the inner struggle. The black hole wasn't merely an astronomical phenomenon. It was a gateway to an alien reality, and they were about to cross its threshold. The sense of displacement was now a constant aboard the Tempest. The black hole and its relentless gravity were no longer merely cosmic curiosities. They had become a presence invading every corner of the ship. Lyra Hale stood at her station, her eyes glued to the display before her, but her mind was drifting. She knew this wasn't just another exploratory mission. Everything happening there was defying the laws of physics. Time, space, and perception were being manipulated, not by a natural phenomenon, but by something alive, an alien intelligence attempting to communicate, not with words, but with memories, images, and sensations. Distortions grew more frequent, and Lyra felt her mind gradually deteriorating, every fragment of her past being pulled into the present like a magnet. The pain of losing her daughter, the failure of her previous mission, the periods of isolation, all were reawakened within her, no longer merely memories, but images projected by the entity inside the black hole. "Commander, what's happening?" Kara asked, breaking the oppressive silence filling the control cabin. Lyra had no answer. She was no longer sure of anything. Around the ship, space distorted further, as though the very fabric of reality were folding and twisting into impossible shapes. Stars that had been visible in the distance now began shifting, as though being pulled toward the center of the black hole. "We're beyond any parameters," Oliver said, his voice nearly drowned out by the pressure in the cabin. Lyra looked at him, her gaze dark and deep, then looked again at the data. None of it made sense. The physics they knew had unraveled. They were being swallowed, not just by the black hole, but by something vastly bigger. "We have to pull back," Lyra said, mostly to herself rather than the crew. But as the words left her mouth, something within her knew there was no longer a way out. There was no more escape, because the black hole wasn't merely distorting reality around them. It was now warping their own perceptions too. They weren't just in a different place, they were in a different reality, where human physics no longer applied. The rules had changed, and now the black hole was inside them. Lyra stepped back from the display, trying to collect her thoughts. The pressure inside the ship, both physical and emotional, was becoming unbearable. The atmosphere felt charged, and she sensed she was being observed by something far beyond human understanding. "Commander," Kara said, cutting through her thoughts again, "the gravity sensors are picking up a strange force coming from the black hole's core. It's as if we're being watched.
A chill shot through Lyra's spine. Impossible. She knew black holes could distort gravity, but what Kara described felt more profound, beyond standard physics. Watched? Lyra repeated, her voice trembling. Kara nodded, her expression a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Yes, as if something is analyzing us, as though we're being studied by an intelligence. And there's more. We're starting to see images of a possible future, but they make no sense. Lyra knew exactly what Kara meant. They weren't merely seeing these images, they were living them. Or worse, they were part of them. I saw my daughter, Commander, Kara said, her voice shaking. Lyra turned to her, trying to conceal the pain she herself felt. She was in one of those images. She spoke to me. Kara's train of thought faltered, her mind unraveling under the pressure. Lyra felt a tightness in her chest. She knew the black hole's illusions were beginning to affect everyone aboard. Space-time was being twisted in a way they couldn't comprehend, projecting and manipulating their memories. She thought of losing her daughter, of the choices she'd made, of the mission that failed. Now those memories were blending with the present, and she could no longer tell where reality ended and distortion began. I don't know what's happening, Lyra said, her voice low and weary, but we know we're not alone here. Something is watching us, and it's not just the black hole. There's something inside it, something intelligent, something powerful. As the ship drew even nearer to the black hole's edge, the crew was struck by an overwhelming sense of dread, as though on the verge of a cosmic revelation they had no power to understand. Lyra watched helplessly as the ship's interior began to warp as well. The cabin walls seemed to bend, and the screens began showing distorted reflections of her own image, as though space itself were folding over them. She clung to the console, trying to remain centered, but what she felt was no longer merely gravity. It was a sense of inevitability, of the black hole becoming part of her, as though it were gradually absorbing her, mentally and physically. Lyra, we have to do something, Oliver said, his voice filled with urgency. Lyra met his gaze, and in that moment, she knew there was nothing left to do. They had reached the point of no return, and their only option was to venture to the heart of the abyss to see what waited there. Something beyond human comprehension, something older than existence itself. The ship continued to be drawn in, and Lyra realized that something deeper was now at play. They were being guided to a new understanding, a cosmic revelation beyond the scope of human intelligence. Something lay at the center of the black hole, something on the verge of being revealed. Perhaps it was a truth that even the living couldn't fully comprehend. Lyra didn't know if she was ready for whatever was to come, but she did know one thing. Nothing would ever be the same. The abyss was within them now, and they were on the brink of discovering whatever lay there. The Tempest now drifted in the black hole's vortex, and the distortion that had once affected only the sensors and the surrounding space had taken over everything. The ship felt like an extension of the black hole itself, a fragment of the abyss being pulled into the very fabric of space-time. Lyra Hale was in command, but she wasn't the same woman who had begun this mission. Her eyes, which once shone with a leader's determination, were now dull, as though something inside her had changed. She wasn't sure whether it was the black hole's effect or whether it was all in her head. She could still hear her daughter's voice echoing in her mind, but it was no longer a simple memory. It was as if her daughter were present, speaking to her on a level she couldn't fathom. "Commander, the calculations are disintegrating," Kara said, her tone fearful as she stared at the control panels. "None of this makes sense. The coordinates are changing on their own." Lyra blinked, struggling to grasp Kara's words, but everything around her seemed to flow like a river beyond her control, each element of the reality she knew dissolving into something alien and impossible. The crew was visibly disoriented, and Lyra knew she could no longer trust the ship's sensors. The black hole was manipulating reality, and they were no longer merely observing it. They were being consumed by it, swallowed by a force beyond understanding. "Commander, we have to decide now," said Oliver, the chief astrophysicist, his voice fragile but resolute. "If we can't find a way to stabilize the ship, we'll be pulled into the core. It could be the end." Lyra looked at him, her face marked by fear, but part of her, some deeper part that she couldn't deny, knew this wasn't the end. Not for her, not for them. Something, some cosmic force, was awakening inside her, something she didn't understand, but which drew her to the black hole's center. Space around her seemed to bend, and she felt as though the black hole's very intelligence was guiding her thoughts.
Whatever was waiting there was far greater than any calculation or theory. "We're too close," she said, her voice almost a whisper, laced with inexplicable certainty. "We can't go back now." A burst of static cut through the ship's radio, interrupting the oppressive silence in the command cabin. Indecipherable sounds poured from the communication system, as though the black hole itself was reaching out to them. Lyra narrowed her eyes, attempting to make sense of the words that had none. "Commander," Oliver said, his face pale with fear, "this isn't a natural phenomenon. It's more than physical. We're being swallowed by a mental field." With each word, Lyra felt the gap between reality and the unknown shrinking. The black hole wasn't just a cosmic object, it was an intelligent cosmic force, a presence that employed space and time to communicate in ways no human could ever comprehend. A chill snaked down Lyra's spine. She realized with horrifying clarity that they were no longer on a scientific mission. They were interacting with something beyond human understanding. The black hole wasn't just observing them. It was using their minds as a conduit to manifest, a realm of experiences and realities that didn't belong to this universe. "What's happening to our memories?" Kara asked, her voice trembling. Lyra looked at her, confused, until a wave of clarity took hold. Her daughter, the accident, the failed mission. But her memories no longer lined up with the reality she once knew. The images overlaid one another, sounds, faces, voices. She heard her daughter calling out to her, but not as a memory. Her daughter's voice was vivid and present, as though in some reality bridging space and time. "Commander, this isn't real. It can't be real," Kara said desperately. Lyra shut her eyes, trying to focus, but the distortion was taking hold of her mind. Something was feeding on them, their emotions, their deepest memories. Now the ship was no longer just a vessel, but a prison, a capsule of perception confining them between worlds. "I don't know what's real anymore," Lyra said, a tremor in her voice. "But I do know something's out there, something calling us, something bringing us back to the origin, the heart of the abyss." The black hole was no longer a mere physical shape in space. It was an entity extending beyond time, manipulating the minds and hearts of those who dared approach. Lyra knew the abyss wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the start of something new, an experience she and her crew had to confront in ways that transcended fear, pain, and even reality. They were being consumed, not by gravity, but by the black hole's intelligence, something that had been waiting to be recognized, to be understood. "We're entering a new state of existence," Lyra murmured. "What comes next? No one can predict." The ship's lights began blinking again, more intensely this time. The air felt heavier, as if each breath demanded more effort. Lyra turned to the command screen and saw the data flickering before her, but it no longer resembled standard mission data. They were reflections of an experience she couldn't fully comprehend. The abyss, now closer than ever, seemed to open before them like a gateway to an entirely new reality. But before she could gather her thoughts, the ship shuddered violently. The feeling of being pulled intensified, and everyone aboard was forced to cling to whatever they could. "We're entering the core," Oliver shouted, though his voice was almost smothered by the rising sounds of space and time tearing. Lyra felt the pressure build, but something inside her knew this was only the beginning. The black hole wasn't trying to destroy them. It was inviting them, connecting them to a reality beyond human understanding. "Brace yourselves," Lyra said, her voice scarcely above a whisper. "We don't know what's coming, but we know we can't turn back." She looked through the ship's window and saw, in the distance, a radiant light emanating from the black hole's center, as though a doorway had opened before them. Lyra knew the moment was upon them. The truth, whatever it might be, awaited them there, and they were on the verge of uncovering what truly lay beyond the abyss. Absolute silence filled the Tempest. After the ship's most recent jolt, which nearly threw them against the interior walls, everyone in the command cabin was steeped in a sense of uncertainty, and also a silent acceptance. Lyra Hale stared hard at the screen before her, where fragmented and deconstructed data scrolled by. They were in some liminal space between time and distance, completely under the black hole's gravitational thrall, mind and body. There was no longer any clear dividing line between the ship and the singularity devouring it. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew that whatever lay ahead would be more than a physical event.
They were being tested in ways that transcended science, physics, and reason. It was a brush with infinity, something that perhaps shouldn't be possible, but that was now becoming an inescapable reality. "Commander," Oliver said, his voice weaker than usual but charged with urgency. "The patterns we're seeing, they've changed. We're not just being pulled into the black hole's center, we're being transformed." Lyra looked at him, his words echoing in her mind. They weren't just heading for an end, they were becoming part of something much greater, a something unhindered by the laws of physics. "I know," Lyra replied, her voice steady but burdened by an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. She no longer knew how to cope with the accelerating distortion taking hold of her own mind. The images were breaking down, and the line between what was real and what was conjured by the black hole's forces was crumbling. A black hole isn't just a gravitational force. It's something conscious, something intelligent, Lyra said, more to herself than to the crew. And now, we're part of that consciousness. Oliver and Kara exchanged quick glances, but the certainty in their eyes matched Lyra's. They knew there was no way to turn back. The ship now felt synchronized with something that had no business existing, an intelligence warping space-time around them, somehow merging with their minds. "What does this mean for us?" Kara asked, her voice subdued and rife with anxiety. "I don't know, but maybe we can find out," Lyra answered, her resolve beginning to solidify. There was no more resisting that force. Whatever was happening, they had no choice but to press on. As the ship crept closer still to the black hole's core, the distortions worsened. Stars in the vicinity twisted into impossible shapes, and light seemed to shatter and fragment. Lyra felt the gravitational pull as more than just gravity. Something deeper was urging them onward. Images and sounds from the past and future overlapped, while the boundaries of reality seemed to melt. Each breath Lyra took was marked by a rising wave of anxiety, but also a heightened awareness. She knew she was about to cross an irreparable line. This was no longer just a scientific voyage. They were trespassing into a dimension beyond rational comprehension. The memories of her daughter, of her loss, were interwoven now with visions of a distant future, alternate realities. The black hole had become a gateway into something far greater than any human could have foreseen. "Commander, we're no longer in control," Kara said, voice trembling. Lyra knew this was true. They had been swallowed by the black hole in a way that could never be undone. "It's as though everything is collapsing," Oliver muttered, his voice cracked. "We're not in a defined space anymore. We can't talk about space-time. We're somewhere that doesn't follow the rules." A shudder ran through Lyra, but a part of her was oddly fascinated. Yes, they were being consumed, but they were also becoming part of something greater, a realm unconstrained by human limits. The black hole wasn't an end. It was a threshold, an entrance to a more profound understanding of existence. Lyra looked to the ship's screen, where distorted images rippled. They were no longer images of space, but of possibilities, of parallel worlds and alternate realities. The black hole was opening those doors, forcing each of them to confront versions of themselves they didn't recognize. "This isn't a mission anymore," Lyra said, her voice imbued with an almost serene acceptance. "It's an evolution." The sense of distortion intensified. Lyra felt a pressure in her chest as though space and time were crushing her perception. The abyss wasn't just a cosmic power. It was a mirror of something far more profound, something humanity wasn't equipped to grasp. The rules of reality were unraveling around them, forcing them to re-examine the truths they once clung to. "We're approaching a critical point," Kara said, eyes locked on the screen, brimming with both fear and awe. "I don't know if we're ready for this." Lyra knew, without a doubt, that they weren't, but something inside her insisted there was no turning back. They were being absorbed by the very core of the universe, a core they didn't know, but were now part of. "We don't have to be ready," Lyra said, her voice quiet yet inexorably strong, "because what's happening now is the next step for humanity." She looked at the faces of her crew, knowing there was nothing left to say. They were about to step beyond the boundary of understanding, and there could be no turning back. The ship was pulled in closer, its sense of time fracturing altogether. Lyra and the crew were now immersed in the black hole's essence, an experience surpassing human understanding. They were no longer just exploring the unknown. They were being changed by it, absorbed and reshaped. Lyra stepped away from the window and looked at her crew, their faces reflecting a new calm acceptance. They no longer tried to maintain control, because there was no control to be had. They had been utterly consumed by the cosmic power, and now, ahead of them, the abyss was no longer an ending, but a doorway to a new kind of existence, one that transcended space and time. Lyra turned back to the screen and watched as the ship began vanishing into the black hole's center, as though swallowed by something far greater than itself. They weren't dying. They were transcending, moving beyond what the universe had dictated for them.